Yo, what is good everybody? My name is Artorigold and today we're going to do a tier list for OP-03. As you guys know, we are getting two new structure decks later sometime in August. That will be the yellow Yamato and the black Luffy. I can throw those in at the end, but I wouldn't take it too seriously because, well, they're not out yet. Anyways, before we get into the video, make sure to leave a like, a sub, and comment down below with something you guys want to see us do next. Maybe a certain leader deck profile, an unboxing, maybe a different card game altogether. Anyways, let's go ahead and dive into it. Let's go ahead and start with tier 5 and work our way up to tier 0. These are going to be the worst decks. I mean, putting it plainly and as kindly as possible, they're not very good. And that is going to be Shanks, that will be Uta, and that will be, where is he? You know him, King. So these effects are all pretty slow. They don't do a whole lot in the early game. They have kind of high costs to them. All of these things about these decks, it's just weak in comparison to everything else. It's not really worth building them. So I would stay clear of these decks in general, which is a shame. They do look very cool. Next up is tier 4. There are a lot of decks in here, and they're just not quite ready to be better yet. Either they're missing cards, their effects are a little bit too slow in a format where the meta is just a little too fast, or possibly in some cases, they are dual color, which means that they have only 4 life, which is a pretty big downside right now, where red decks are meta. And, you know, they just kill you really quickly, so having 4 life, it's pretty bad. So we're gonna have red-black Garp, one of those decks that just, it's not quite there. It doesn't really have a place. The red and black color combo doesn't have a whole lot of synergy. The cost reduction doesn't really do much for red. There is a couple of neat things you can do, but all around you might as well just play a full-on mono black or mono red instead. Next up is red-green Luffy. Pretty good, honestly. Out of all of them, this is probably one of the best ones, but it's just like, why not play Trafalgar Law or any other red deck instead? Next up is Blurple. Not just one, but 2 Blurples. We have Croc and Kaido. Both of these decks are looking pretty good for set 4, but right now the format's not slow enough for them. They have a lot of value and they can get a lot of card draw or Dawn generation, and I think the color combo is pretty good. But really, it's just lacking a little bit right now, and the 4 life really hurts them, because by the time they get really good value trades, well, they'll be dead. Next, we have Odin. This is a deck that's pretty cool. It's very unique. It's very aggressive, but it has a really bad downside, and it gets rid of cards extremely fast. So it's basically a YOLO deck, but there's way better YOLO decks out there. Cough, cough, Whitebeard. So, like, yeah, Odin, he just needs more Wano cards, maybe, to be good, but all around, it's just not that great to just spit everything out and get rid of your whole hand, and you just have nothing to do if you fall behind. Then we have another Navy leader, Akainu, or Sakazuki. Not all around a terrible leader, but he just kind of falls short with the other Navy options, or other black options, I should say. He's pretty cool, he's not bad. You ditch a card to kill a 0, but the Navy cards already kind of do that. Like, they already have Kobe, and they have the character version of Kainu, and those ditch a card to destroy a card, but they don't have to be a cost of 0 for you to do it. So it just kind of begs the question, what's the point, right? It's just more of the same effect. If anything, it's a bit worse than the characters that you already have. So it's not all that great. It's just kind of unnecessary, and the other black options are going to be way better. And then we have the final 2. Or actually, the final 3. We have the 2 new leaders. One is Iceberg, and the other one would be Arlong. Both of these are kinda neat, but they're just not quite it yet. Right now, Purple is way too slow, and although his leader effect does get a lot of 5 costs out kinda quickly, and you have a lot of other side little things you can do, it really lacks a true boss monster. And the fact that you can't attack with your leader ends up kind of devastating in this format, especially if you're playing against people like Zoro or Trafalgar Law. So all around, it's just not quite there yet, but I could see it being a lot better in the future when they get more support. And as for Arlong, he kind of has the same downside as every other dual color leader right now. Having 4 life is pretty devastating unless the effect is really insane. And as for his effect, it's pretty good, honestly. The problem is that there aren't many trigger cards that are actually worth playing. You see, the problem with Arlong is that the trigger cards have to be with a character card, which means that you can't use any of the event triggers. And really, those are pretty much all the best ones, right? So yeah, you can kind of get maybe a killer out for free, a Karubi out for free, something like that. That's okay, but it's really not progressing the board state too much because those guys don't really have any extra attack, and you can't like use them like Kuro can to try to use your leader effect to go in for second attacks. So yeah, it's just not there yet. I think Arlong has a pretty neat effect. It just lacks a lot of really good trigger cards, which maybe will come out in future sets, which could potentially make him a lot more viable. And lastly, in tier 4, we have my favorite character in the series, and also my favorite card, but sadly, it's a deck that just isn't that good. Maybe in set 4 you get Red Rock and maybe he'll be a bit more viable, but all around the deck just is based around vanilla cards, which is terrible. I mean, in other card games there are plenty of different things that happen with vanilla cards, but they're all not that great either. Having a deck based around vanillas is not really that interesting to me, and I'm a little bit disappointed. I hope we can get another leader for Sanji, which is pretty possible. I mean, you already have 2 Luffys, right? I mean, you already also have 2 Doflamingos as well, so there is a potential for a second Sanji leader, which is what I'm really hoping for. All around, he's just not quite that powerful. His leader effect, while it's alright, it's still based around vanillas, and that's just not that good currently in this meta. So he's tier 4, and sadly, I don't think he's going to be viable for quite some time. Anyways, moving on to tier 3. These are decks that honestly are just mid. And that's putting it nicely. I mean, they're not bad, but they're not super competitive. I mean, these are decks that you could win tournaments at, especially locals, but I don't see them being hyper competitive at bigger events, but they're still pretty good. And they are definitely worth considering if you want to play just something different, new, just for fun, right? So tier 3, we're gonna have Kinemon. There are basically no new cards this set for Supernovas or Wano, which means that Kinemon and also Kid, they don't really have anything new. So they're just the same exact deck from the old format in a new format where a bunch of other cards are introduced to make other decks stronger, so they just kind of fell behind. That's like the best way to put it, right? They're just behind a little bit. It's not a bad deck, it's just not getting anything new. So for that reason, we put not just Kinemon in tier 3, but we're also going to put Kaido in tier 3. It's kind of just the same story. They're both decks that aren't terrible, but they're just not that competitive because they have nothing new. Actually, while that is on the table, we can also say the exact same thing for Ivankov, right? I mean, Impel Down is pretty good. It was great last set, but there's no new Impel Down cards. So I wouldn't really put him in tier 2 or higher. I think he's still a solid deck, but anytime a new set comes out and they don't get really any new cards to play around with, it's a little bit rough. And the bigger thing too with Impel Down is, or at least maybe just Blue in general, they did get some more generic events that are pretty good, but they're not very good with Ivankov, right? Because the whole thing with him is that he ditches a lot of cards, and so you have stuff like Sanji's Peel-Off that makes you draw 2, which in theory is pretty good, but you don't really need that in Ivankov because you're going to just get rid of your whole hand and draw 2 at the end of your turn already. Right? So you can kind of see the problem with that. Not a terrible deck though. I think it's pretty good. I enjoyed it. I was able to top with him and win some tournaments in set 2. It's just fallen behind a bit. Same of course can be said for Z. Not a bad leader. I honestly think the leader effect is pretty good, but yeah, he has 4 life, so that sets him behind. He's still a very solid pick though, and I would say also Red Luffy. While it is a decent deck, it's basically the same deck that you would run if you were to run any other kind of red. Like if you were to run a Zoro deck, it would probably be pretty similar to Luffy. It's just like, why would you run Luffy when you could just run Zoro, right? So yeah, there's just not too much point to him, but he's not bad. Then we have Black Yellow Big Mom. Not bad, actually. I like her effect a lot, Her downside is you have 4 life, so that kind of sucks, but you can use a lot of the cool new powerful boss cards you get with yellow, and the navy stuff isn't too bad either. And you also get some blockers that can't get KO'd, which is like the worst part about most blockers right now is they get killed by Marcos. And so with the black-yellow, you can run Borsalino, or you could even have the Chapapa blocker, so they don't get KO'd and you don't have to worry about it. It's pretty good. It's not bad. The only big downside to this is that you have 4 life. In my opinion, that can be kind of risky when you play against Whitebeard mainly. But I think she does pretty good against other decks like Zoro. And then the last 2, I would say, would be Magellan and Doflamingo. Magellan's not bad. He got a few new things. They're all right. But all around, it's just not Purple's meta. I think that Purple is a slower kind of deck, and right now the meta's just too fast for them. And Doflamingo, I think the deck is honestly pretty good, and I would rate it tier 2. However, I just can't say that because the biggest reason why he would be tier 2 is if you're gonna pump out like 200 plus bucks for the Treasure Cup promo Jinbei card, which you just absolutely need in order to make this deck better. And I'm not gonna do that. I'm not going to spend that kind of money for that. I don't think you are either. It just isn't worth it. I mean, you could spend that kind of money and build like 2 other decks completely, right? So why even bother? I don't want to recommend him for you guys for tier 2, even though it could be if you spend that kind of dough. It's not worth it. It really isn't. And that is it for my tier 3. Let's go ahead and move into tier 2. So for me, tier 2 is my favorite. It is the rogue tier. These are ones that are very competitive. However, they require more skill to use than the counterparts in tier 0 and tier 1. And it's more rewarding to win with them. And they are very good. It's just that they fall a little bit behind for a reason, one or another, and we'll kind of go into it on the individual basis here. Let's go ahead and talk about one of my favorite ones that I have been playing lately, which is Nami. Now, I absolutely love this deck. It is a very fun kind of win condition that is very unique to the game. I really like just milling myself to get the win. The problem is, you have Kabaji on the ban list, and so now the deck just isn't at that power that we saw in the Japanese format, which is fine, I suppose, but really it's tough to kind of get a win with her unless you have really good cards in the life. That's kind of been what wins me every game. It always feels like I'm down to my last couple of cards every single game, and what really makes me win is if I get that pot of greed in my life, right? Like, depending on what triggers I have is what determines if I will win the game or not. So it feels kind of like a coin flip deck, but it is pretty solid. I mean, if the enemy screws up and doesn't go for the throat, then you can win, right? Because the more turns that you have to live is more turns that you're drawing. So I think the deck is pretty fun, if for just the one reason that I make the enemy mad, and that I enjoy. So for that reason, tier 2, in my opinion. Next up is the best blue deck this format, actually, Crocodile. I think Nami is really good, but Crocodile is definitely the more consistent competitive blue deck. You have Pot of Greed, you have 3000 Worlds, and Mihawk is a bit better now that people are using 5-cost Marco. It's such a good target for Mihawk. I think this deck is pretty solid. I mean, you can have a 9-cost Mihawk, send something to the bottom of the deck, and normally in every other blue deck, that would be your only play for the turn. But with Crocodile, you can also use the leader effect and also bounce another card on the field, meaning that the turn where you have 9 Dawn is way more impactful on Crocodile and swings the game a lot more in your favor than it would with any other blue deck. So yeah, I think a couple of new cards have definitely made Crocodile a contender, but it's still just not as consistent as the tier 1 or tier 0 decks, but I do think it has a lot of power. Next up is Smoker. Smoker is not a bad Navy leader. I think he's a lot better than Akainu, but he's just, not really anything new. I mean, everything this set was basically CP9. You get a couple of things for Navy that you can use for Smoker that are pretty good, such as Fujitora. I mean, that's excellent against Whitebeard. And then you have, I think, the brand new, the bald guy. He's not bad either. But all around, they didn't get a whole lot of additional support. It's not bad at all, though. I mean, tier 2 for Rogue tier is very good, and you could easily win a locals with them. Next up, we have my man, Kuro. I love this deck. I actually think it's really good, and it catches people so off guard that you can sneak wins in very easily. It's an aggressive deck that Zoro players and Trafalgar Law players will fear. The problem is, he doesn't do all that great against Whitebeard. That is one of the tougher matchups for him. But considering Trafalgar Law and Zoro and how good they are, I mean, this is an excellent anti-meta deck, in my opinion. It basically took the spot of what Kinemon was. They were both basically anti-meta decks, namely trying to seek out wins against those Zoro players. Problem is Whitebeard is also very dominant right now, and that's kind of where he falls short. But all around, still a very fun leader. I insist that you try him out because it's super cheap to make. As for the last two, I have Captain Kidd and Charlotte Lin, the yellow structure deck Big Mom. I mean, both of these are pretty good. Personally, Kidd is kind of the same problem as Doflamingo right now, where if you want to do the film version, he's going to struggle pretty hard because you have to buy those really expensive Bark cards from the Treasure Cup promos. And who wants to buy them? I mean, that's so expensive. I just can't recommend it. I do think he's better than Doflamingo, though, because Kidd has a lot more power against Whitebeard, in my opinion. Doflamingo doesn't quite cut it against him. And double attack swinging when a Whitebeard has 0 life is just really good in general. But yeah, the film version is probably the best version of him right now. And I can't recommend you guys going out there and buying the Barts. So the only real option that I could recommend for him, and it's still pretty good, is the Supernova Beatdown version that we saw in a video a couple months back when I first started this channel. I recommend a version like that and just try to go a full anti-Whitebeard deck and snipe wins against them. I think that's going to make him way better, at least way more affordable of an option for you if you're trying to play Kidd. And then lastly, we have Lin, pretty good effect. Not terrible. I think that she's pretty consistent. If you're looking for a yellow leader, it's not bad. All around, there's not much to say about her. I mean, the yellow deck between her and Katakuri, they're both played exactly the same. There's only one reason why you would play her over Katakuri, and that is, are you playing online or not? And that would be a great segue into the tier 1 picks with Katakuri. Now, I think Katakuri is an excellent deck, so much so I think he will win tournaments. The problem is that they nerfed him for webcam tournaments. You are no longer able to use his effect to look at the enemy's life. I mean, you got to think like the logistics of it. It's very difficult to get that across when you're doing a webcam duel. So for that reason, this guy, super good deck, but honestly, I think I would rather play her if I'm in a webcam tournament and I'm not able to use Katakuri's effect to the full potential. I think she would probably be what I would play instead. I mean, the decks are basically going to be the same. It's just the leader effects that will change. But if you're playing in locals, you're playing, in real life, Katakuri is definitely tier 1. A very, very good leader. It's just, it gets a little tricky when it comes to the webcam stuff. And then the other two that I have in tier 1 are going to be Rob Lucci and Ace. All the CP9 stuff is fantastic, and because Rob Lucci can attack twice, it makes him very good against Whitebeard. Ace is also really cool right now, a very unique way of playing, and his cards are all very solid. I mean, Fire Fist, Flame Emperor, you get all the red engine going, you can use all the Whitebeard pirates because he's a Whitebeard pirate, right? So it's solid. It's a really fun red deck. It's a lot more original than some of the other red decks that we have. So yeah, let's go ahead and talk about tier 0, and then we can also kind of lump these all together. The last 3, Whitebeard, Zoro, Trafalgar Law. So, I mean, it's not really a surprise. These 3 decks have been dominating since set 1, except for Whitebeard, who just dominated from set 2. But we see them pretty much topping and winning every single tournament ever, including in Japan. I mean, Whitebeard alone had like 40+ tournament wins in Japan, and we're probably going to be seeing him nonstop, even though the stage is banned. He doesn't really care. And same with Trafalgar Law and Zora, right? Like their decks are not that different. They just, if anything, are better because you have Ezo and Marco and Buggy, so many more one costs that search things. And then you have Curly Dodon who can search the one costs, who search the things. It's a nightmare. It really is a nightmare right now. Red is way too powerful. And so if you were to go to a tournament, I would basically recommend these 6 decks, unless you're playing a webcam tournament. Then I would just recommend these 5. I do think Katakuri is way weaker in a webcam tournament, so keep that in mind. However, if you're playing, it's going to be these 3. I mean, they're just way too good. They're way too overpowered. They really need to see more hits on the ban list. In my opinion, I think I would love to see red cards get a little bit hit, but it looks like they're not really interested in doing that. So we are looking at a red dominated meta for this entire set 3 right now. Even if they do hit something on the ban list, it'll be for set 4, and I doubt they'll hit anything. At this rate, it looks like they're completely fine with the red being this broken. At the very end, actually, I could give you guys what I theorize these 2 structure decks will be. In my opinion, I think Yamato will be tier 1 and the yellow deck to play, or the yellow leader to play. If you're doing webcam over Katakuri, I would definitely suggest Yamato. And then Black Luffy, while he is pretty good, I honestly think he's only tier 3. He could potentially get like one really big swing in, but right now, the only time you would really want a nice, really big swing is if you're playing against Whitebeard, and Whitebeard usually has a bunch of Marcos blocking for him, so that swing probably won't get too much value. So he's just going to be mid when he comes out, but I do think Yamato will be tier 1 when she comes out. She'll be the yellow leader to run because having 6k life is going to be a lot tougher for people like Zoro and Trafalgar Law to deal with. Whitebeard probably doesn't care as much, but at least you can ditch 1k counters instead of 2ks, so that does make it a bit more viable. But yeah, that's it for my tier list, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I don't know if you agree or disagree. Hey, let me know in the comments what you guys think. We can talk a little bit about it. This is just my opinion on how everything is going to run in the tournament scene competitively here in America. So yeah, have a good one, guys, and I'll see you next time. Peace.